our local county commissioner. He represents our district. He was the mayor of Grantsville, and he is just this powerful bundle of energy focused on growing this region. I mean, he's just constantly working on this. So I am so honored and happy that he's here to join us today. If everybody could please welcome Paul Edwards.
Thank you very much, Regina. I think I'll hire you as my publicist. I've been called a lot of things. Amazing isn't usually one of them. I want to welcome everybody to Garrett County, in particular Grantsville. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. Regina said, I love this area. I was born and raised here. I spent a lot of time in public service here, and hopefully we'll get to spend a lot more time in that regard. Before I get into my little spiel about Grantsville, and I realize some of you guys were here last year, so I'll try to vary it up just a little bit. I do want to talk to you a little bit about Garrett County, because we are special in many ways, but when you think about the geography of the county that you're in, how many of you, this is your first time in Garrett County? Well, a little history or little known facts, little known useless facts. I taught for a long time, and history is my passion. I found that the older I got, the smaller the scope of what, I think that was mine. You're still my call.
We share here.
That's all right. That's all right. Garrett County is the second largest county in the state of Maryland. We're also the youngest county. Because they don't count the surface, water surface when they do the size of counties, we don't count Deep Creek Lake. If you count Deep Creek Lake in the service area, we're the largest county in Maryland. To give you a little bit of the scope of that, I also work for the public school system. I'm the director of middle and high schools for Garrett County Public Schools. Our school buses every year travel our roads and make the equivalent of about 32 times around the surface of the earth, driving our kids to and from school every day. So we're a pretty large landmass. In Maryland, we have the largest lake, which is Deep Creek. We have the highest mountain, which is Backbone Mountain. We have the most state land owned by the state, about 90-some thousand acres. We have the smallest state park, which is right across the street. The Castleman River State Park is 4 acres. The locals call it Chipmunk Park. It's the smallest state park by far, actually, in the state. We have the largest cave, which is called Crabtree Cave, which is down around the Finsville area. And also, interestingly, the largest waterfall, Muddy Creek Falls, or Swallow Falls. And interestingly enough, we have 4 major rivers in Garrett County. The Castleman, the Youghiogheny, the Savage, and the Potomac. 3 of those 4 flow north in Garrett County, which is somewhat of an anomaly. Most rivers don't flow north, and it's very rare that so many in one area do. The only one that doesn't is the Savage, and people always say to me, well, the Potomac doesn't flow north. It does in Garrett County. The Potomac flows north from the start in Garrett County to Luke, Maryland, which is right across the line in Allegheny County. And once it hits Luke, it makes its turn and heads south. So while it's in Garrett County, 100% of the Potomac flows north. So we have a lot of interesting little, like I said before, sort of meaningless information that I like to share with people. And that brings me to this town of Grantsville. And the older I've gotten, what I've come to realize is, you know, Baltimore and New York and Washington, they've got all this great stuff, and everybody, when they come in from a tourist perspective from overseas, or even people growing up in this country, those are the places that they want to go. But it's truly areas like our own that sort of wrote the history of our nation. And Grantsville, to me, is sort of a microcosm of the history of our entire country. And what I mean by that is, you can go all the way back to the founding. In Maryland, which you may or may not know, was founded back in the, I believe it was the 1600s. And it actually started out as a Catholic colony. You're probably very well aware the Europeans were coming over here because of religious war. A lot of them came here for religious freedom, and Catholics were part of that. And Maryland was originally set up as a Catholic colony. people could come here and be free of persecution if they were Catholic. And that only lasted a short time because a lot of Protestants moved in then and that changed. And Maryland was sort of the first colony to really have religious freedom. That you could truly practice freely whatever religion that you wanted. And obviously all of that sort of built up in the Chesapeake Bay area because the main form of transportation at that time was boat. So out here in western Maryland, in the mountains, in Garrett County in particular, there were Native American tribes, just like farther west. And as people moved west, and they're still moving west into Alaska and everything today, as people moved west, they encountered those Native Americans. And here it was the Delaware and the Shawnee in particular. These weren't stupid people. If you don't know anything about Garrett County, we also have brutal winters. So the Shawnee and the Delaware would come in the summer, they would hunt and they would fish, and then the winter would come and they would leave because they were smart. And they traveled via path. Their paths were not unlike if you would go to New Germany State Park or some of these other areas where there's just paths in the woods. That's what the original Native American paths were like. And the famous one here was called Nemacolin's Path. Nemacolin was, and you probably heard of Nemacolin because there's a big resort right up the road. It was obviously named after him. Nemacolin was, I want to say Delaware, but he was probably Shawnee. I don't have that one memorized, so I apologize. But he was a chief of the tribe, and it ran right through here. Westward expansion starts happening, and there's a lot of skirmishes with the natives. And the English have to put a lot of money and resources. And see if any of this sounds familiar as I go through this, even to this day. The government has to put a lot of resources in protecting its citizens from the savagery of the Native Americans. And so in 1763, the king issues a proclamation called very amazingly the Proclamation of 1763, and he said, you can't go past the Allegheny Mountain. No settlers of the New World can go past the Allegheny Mountains. One of the reasons we fight the Revolutionary War is specifically mentioned by our forefathers as one of these egregious attempts to suppress us. And to that end, not only did they put that proclamation on so that westward expansion would stop so they wouldn't get into these fights with the natives and they wouldn't have to put money and resources into areas like this where there's not a lot of people. The French, also trying to make a play on the New World, start to put forts all along the interior, along our waterways, and most famously for us in this area, Fort Duquesne was an effort which is now called Pittsburgh. The French were building at the Three Rivers, at the forts of the Three Rivers to halt westward expansion. That did not stop us and the Garrett County renegade spirit. We continue to move west. Those skirmishes continue. Now the French threat on the frontier is very real. So the king comes in and he says, we're going to send an expedition out and we're going to clear these French out. And so they get an English general from Virginia by the name of General Braddock. And General Braddock is to come to Fort Cumberland, which amazingly enough in 1750s, Cumberland, Maryland, Fort Cumberland is one of the largest cities in the New World, in the colonies. General Braddock brings with him an aspiring young general, not yet a general, an aspiring young officer in the Virginia Army by the name of George Washington. George Washington has staked his entire future on this expedition. So they come to Cumberland, they meet up, and they know that Nemacolin's Path comes through here, so they want to follow Nemacolin's Path basically to Pittsburgh. So they start clearing a roadway. Today that roadway is called Braddock's Trail. It's basically been grown over. And when they get here, at this time it was called Little Crossings. It wasn't quite called Little. George Washington named it Little Crossings because they crossed the Little Youghiogheny, today called the Castleman. But when they get to this area, which there was some settlement here, mainly due to a hotelier by the name of Joseph Tomlinson, they meet up with a young wagoner because everything's wagon trained. So here, a young wagoner from southwestern Pennsylvania that you all have heard of by the name of Daniel Boone meets up with George Washington and General Braddock. and they crossed the Castleton River. Just about, as best as I can tell, it's between the 68 bridge and the 40 bridge, and they head toward Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh. What happens is they get to what's present day called Farmington. They get into a skirmish with the Native Americans and the French, and they lose, and Braddock is killed. The Fort Necessity is built, and I'm not really going to get into all that this year, but what I want to say about that is, at that time, this is sort of the birth of George Washington and why you have heard that name. Had this happened differently, you would not know George Washington. George Washington, and there's written accounts, and when I taught, this was my favorite story to tell. George Washington was about 6'2½". By today's standards, that's not real tall, but at that time, that was pretty big.
Right.
And not only was it pretty tall, but he was like a fit guy. He was a pretty strong, and he's young at this time. He's in his 20s, so he's still he's kind of in his prime. And Braddock gets killed, and the English, the general's dead, so they don't know what to do, and it's helter-skelter, and people are running. And Washington, and I could go into a whole thing with him. It's basically for him, it's this or it's nothing. He's either going to make it here or he'd rather die because he doesn't really have much of an opportunity anywhere else. So they're writing about Washington, and he grabs his sword and he rides his horse straight. Everyone's retreating except Washington, and he runs right into the fray. And they're shooting at him, and bullets, it looks like he's being hit. He's just mowing down the French and the Indians, and all of his men stop, and they're just kind of staring. It's like slow motion in a movie, right? He's just coming through like the Patriot, and he's killing all these people. And they end up losing the battle. But they write about Washington. Washington was shot 6 times. None of them hit his body. They went through his jacket. All of them. So when he gets off and they're looking at him like, oh my goodness, how did you? And he's showing them all these bullet holes, and he's like, okay. And thus is born the legend of George Washington.
Huh.
Now, I know hair and makeup is being done in the Dunbar room. I'm going to take a pass. The Dunbar room is named after General Dunbar, who was part of this expedition who was moving towards Fort Duquesne. To finish that story, Washington comes back, they reload, they go to Pittsburgh. At that time, Fort Duquesne, they clear out the French, they win, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Dunbar, the people that are injured and hurt in the expedition, they camp out right over here. It's called Camp Dunbar, and that's what this room is named after. And they sort of, they were shot, they were maimed, they were sick. That was where they went to heal. So that all happens. Westward expansion continues, and now all of a sudden, in about 1808, we have an argument or a discussion about federal funds, because remember, some of you may not, if you didn't pay attention to history class in high school, there's this big argument in the beginning of our country, and you're hearing it right now with this bathroom bill. It's the exact same argument. It's national rights and state rights. Which one weighs more? Who has more say? And here, for the very first time in American history, we have the federal government saying, we have to build a road. Because what was happening was you had New York, all of the population is on the East Coast. You've got New York, you've got Baltimore, you've got Richmond. Those are probably the big, and Philly, those are your big 4 cities. And those were the big ports. But what was happening is people were moving west, and all of their goods, there was no train, there was no car, they had to use the rivers. And what you started to see happening was all the interior stuff, when I say the interior, is about the Indiana, was going down the Ohio to the Mississippi, down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and then out. And Baltimore and New York and Richmond and Philly were saying, hey, we got to do something because we're losing out on a lot of money. So an argument happens. What do? Well, we need a road. We need a way to bring those goods to the East Coast and send them out of the port. So, if you follow national politics, we know right now that the FBI is going to relocate its headquarters, and there's a sort of a friendly competition between Maryland and Virginia who's going to get it, because it's going to result in hundreds of thousands of jobs. And everybody's trying to get there. Well, there was a big argument at this time between Richmond, Baltimore, and Philadelphia of who was going to get this national road. And the argument was, if I live in Richmond, why would I pay taxes to a federal government that's going to build a road in Maryland that's not going to help me at all? That's not fair. And we hear that same argument today, and it hasn't gone away. So long story short, Maryland wins, thankfully for Grantsville, primarily because A, Braddock's Road came through here, so there was already a sort of a start, if you will. And Baltimore, which was the largest port in the nation, started to fall behind New York, and they built a road from Baltimore to Frederick to try to bring stuff down into the port, so they already had a start there as well. So on both ends. So the road was commissioned. It's to start in Cumberland. It's also sometimes called the Cumberland Road. Start in Cumberland to go to Wheeling, West Virginia. That's the very first federally funded project in the history of our country. And where does it come? Right through our fair hamlet of Grantsville and north. And when that happened, you know, it brought a lot of jobs and prosperity with it, just like the interstate today. You know, if you travel a back road somewhere, if you drive on 495 from here to Oakland, you'll see lots of field and not much economic growth. But if you drive on 68 from Cumberland to Grantsville, all along the interstate, you see all kinds of stuff. You can debate whether it's good or bad stuff, but there's stuff there. And the stuff is there because the traffic is there. So we get up here to the Castleman River, and we got to build a bridge, because we can't run our wagon, which seems strange because you can just walk right across the Castleman. It's only ankle deep. But they figured they had to build a bridge, so they built that bridge that you see that you'll have a chance to walk on. And I tell people all the time, if you were in Europe, this wouldn't be a big deal, but you're not in Europe, and that's one of the oldest structures that are still standing. It's the original purpose in the entire country today. It was finished in 1814. Schreier was the guy that built it, and he's petrified because, again, this big argument of should we spend federal money to do things for states, so he builds this massive project. It's a lot of money, and the night before, legend has it, it was formed with timbers, so he had his guys the night before pull the timbers to make sure it would still stand, because they were going to like the big ribbon cutting the next day, and everybody was coming out. Madison was president. So the night before, he goes and stands underneath the bridge and has the timbers pulled, because he told everybody, if this doesn't work, I don't want to be around to see it the next day. All right. So they pull the timbers, it stands, and that bridge was in operation all the way up until the late 40s. So it went from horse and buggy and horse and foot traffic to Conestoga wagon, which is coming about 20 years later, to the automobile. My dad remembers riding over in cars, so it was built so well that it could see that transformation happen, and it's still there today. And actually, it's going to be incorporated. We're in the process of trying to build a bike trail, which that's going to be part of. So that's really neat, and we're excited about that as well. The reason it was built so high, because again, I can't imagine that the Castleman was deeper a couple hundred years ago than it is now. You know, it's always kind of been what you see. Is because, again, go back to this canal thing. Everyone wanted to get to the Ohio River. That was sort of the gold mine at that time. The East Coast wanted to get to the Ohio. So that's why you have the C&O Canal, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And the thought was that that canal would come all the way to here, go up the Castleman, under the Castleman River Bridge. Had that have happened, Cumberland today would probably be about the size of Pittsburgh, and Grantsville would probably be about the size of Cumberland. It didn't happen that way, obviously. Why? Because as this transformation is still going on, and we're always trying to get places faster and everything else, the railroad comes in. In the mid-1800s, the B&O Railroad, Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and unfortunately for Grantsville, it takes a southerly route and goes to Oakland. And the interesting thing with that is, when you look, again, everything's westward expansion, it's all this stuff. Garrett County, I told you, was the youngest county in the state. It comes into existence in 1872, and now we need a capital. So there's an argument of who's going to be the capital, and really it's only down to two people. It's between Grantsville and Oakland, because Oakland was the hub of the railroad. Well, at that particular snapshot in time, railroad was king. And so Oakland wins the county seat by 16 votes. And not that anybody in Grantsville is still counting or bitter about that. So Oakland gets the county seat, but the funny thing is we went from Nemacone's Path to Braddock's Trail to the National Road to interstate highway system And right now, Garrett County in 2016 is losing population, unfortunately. But the northern end of the county, specifically because of this area, is growing when everyone else is shrinking. So eventually, and there's a new interstate coming through. You talk about the federal funds and everything else. We built 68, and now we're going to have a new interstate breaking ground in 2018, 219 North, which will go from Grantsville, Maryland, will be basically its start as an interstate, and it will go to Buffalo, New York. And it's the start of a north-south connector as well, and I think that will really help boost the economy of this area. So, why Garrett County? Garrett County was named after John Garrett, who was the president of the B&O Railroad. Why did we separate from Allegheny County? Because everything was centered in Cumberland. And the National Road took money to maintain. And you'll see toll booths. There's a toll booth in LaVale. There's one in Frostburg that they can't seem to find now. And there's one in Addison. And the reason being is because you could charge tolls to help pay for the upkeep of the road. Well, once the railroad came, fewer tolls, less upkeep, more money from the government to fix. People in Cumberland didn't want to spend money to help people way out here, so we felt as if we were not being well represented, so we separated from Allegheny County. And that's why that happened. Grantsville's named after a guy by the name of Daniel Grant, who got this area where the cemetery is. He was given a tract of land called Cornucopia, 1,100 acres. In 1785 and 1796, he forms a town called Grantsville, and it was where the cemetery is. The National Road comes through. It's not where Grants Village is, so they tear down Grants Village and they move some of those buildings to the National Road, and that's the start of our town. The interesting thing, the last note, Regina's given me the time to go. The interesting thing about the National Road is the National Road is not on the footprint of Braddock's Trail. Braddock's Trail is not on the exact footprint of Nemacolin's Path. Route 40 is not on the exact footprint of the National Road. The National Road went right over here. So when you look at this building, which was built by Jesse Tomlinson, it actually faced this way because that's the National Road. And the original entrance of this building is the employee entrance into here. And that's what leads over to the bridge. But there weren't any right-of-ways. You know, back in 1700s and 1800s, there was no right-of-way or easements or anything. You just built the road. So if you owned a piece of property and you said, I don't want that road on my property, you just went around it. So when you look at 40 and some of the old roads that seem to go like this, it's nothing to do with geography at all. It's all about this person didn't want the road on their property and this person didn't care. Now, as that road built up and inns kept coming, because that's where the money was at, this town is fortunate enough to have hosted several presidents. Some of them stayed in this hotel when it was an inn. Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, James K. Polk, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington spent a lot of time here. And any other president that would have been west of here up until about 1860 would have come through here and stayed at one of the 5 or 6 pretty famous inns at the time, right here in the Grantsville area. So, last note, that's where we were. Things are happening. You can see across the street lots of new stuff. We've got a cheese plant that's going to open in the spring. We've got a big gym that's coming next year. And this area that you're in right now with Spruce Forest, Regina did a lot of work on this with a couple other folks. This is Maryland's newest arts and entertainment district, and the next several years will be our opportunity to try to capitalize on that and maximize that. Those efforts, we've already got a new business here because of that right down the street, and I think Angie's going to be here at some point in time to talk about that as well. So, having said all of that, hopefully that wasn't too boring. Thank you all very much for your time. Come again.